What's going on YouTube? Austin Zaback here with another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about what not to do if the real estate market crashes. So you probably know by now, if you're watching the video, that 2021 was one of the craziest years that the majority of us have ever lived through, and 2021 looks pretty uncertain for the real estate market. So at the end of the day, nobody really knows what is going to happen with the real estate market, and I'd hate to be that guy that sat here and said that the market is for sure going to crash in 2021 because I just don't really know. Now, I've made a lot of videos on this particular subject, so if you haven't already, definitely go check those out. And who knows, the market could crash in 2021, it could crash in 2022, 2023, it might not ever crash, and it might just continue to go up like it has been for the last decade. But we definitely always want to plan for the worst, and we definitely want to have a good understanding of what to do and what not to do if we ever face that situation. Because the last thing you want to do is end up like a lot of the people back in 2008, the last time that the market crashed, where you're totally over leveraged, you're forced to sell in a down market, and then ultimately you lose your freaking butt. I mean, I still hear stories to this day of people that are still skeptical because of the 2008 market crash. And these were people that ultimately just made a couple of bad decisions most likely, and therefore they're totally skeptical of the real estate market in general. And I just want to make sure that you're not skeptical, because really the real estate industry is a phenomenal industry to park cash and make money over the long haul, to build wealth, or just to make some passive income. And you probably need somewhere to live anyways, so it's a great place to just buy and hold and live in a primary residence to ultimately build equity over the long term. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it without further ado. And all I ask in return is that you just smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. One of the first big things that you don't want to do if the real estate market ever starts to go another direction is ultimately sell in a down market. And you see this across multiple different industries and multiple sectors throughout the market where people panic sell when things hit the fan. And that is the last thing you want to do. What you want to focus on is the fact that you can't actually lose money unless you sell. The problem that people have is that they'll buy at the height of a market. Hindsight's always 20/20. The market will start to crash, they'll see the property values going down, and they'll sell in a down market. And the problem with that really is if you just hold on for the long haul, you can never actually end up losing money based on just looking at the history of the real estate industry. When you look at over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50 years, the real estate industry is always trending upwards, and home values are always going up over the long run. So while you might have ups and downs in the interim, over the long run, the real estate industry is always going to trend up based on what it's always done. Meaning that no matter what you end up actually paying for a house, whether it's a primary residence, an investment property, a rental property, or whatever it is, as long as you don't buy high and sell low, you can't actually lose money. When you look back in time and you look at all the people that were over leveraged back in the day, one of the biggest problems that I saw was a lot of people having adjustable rate mortgages. And really, you don't want to have an adjustable rate mortgage because that mortgage rate can actually adjust at the wrong time, and the difference of a couple percentage points can really throw you off your game. So you really want to make sure that you have a fixed rate mortgage and then you don't sell in a down market. There's obviously always people that lose their job, or for whatever reason they just can't pay their mortgage, the market is crashing, and ultimately they don't know what to do, right? So they panic sell. But what I would encourage you to do, assuming you have a fixed rate mortgage, is if the market starts to go down and for whatever reason you can't end up paying the mortgage, then attempt to rent out the property and get a tenant in there to pay the mortgage for you. Then obviously you can go ahead and you can downsize entirely. You can move into an apartment complex, you can go rent out something real cheap until ultimately you get back on your feet. There's a lot of different scenarios here, and I'm definitely not going to paint out every different scenario, so drop in the comment section down below what scenarios I missed. But what I would encourage you to, no matter what, not do is don't panic sell. You have to remember, on a non-emotional level, the markets in any market are always going to be going up and down. So as long as you don't sell in a down market, you can't lose money. So this kind of rolls right into point number 2, and that is to ultimately never buy real estate for the short term. Real estate is designed by default to be a long-term play, which is why you have the 30-year fixed mortgage. There's a lot of people that'll get into real estate and they'll be in it for the short term, and the market makes a correction, and all of a sudden they're pretty much SOL. And that goes if you're buying a primary residence also. If you really don't think that you're going to be living in that area, or you don't think that in 3 or 5 years your life is going to look the same, you think maybe you're going to take another job out of state or whatever. Now obviously you can't predict everything, but truly and honestly you have to ask yourself, do you plan on staying there for the long haul? And as long as you plan on buying for the long haul, whether you're buying it to live in it, you're buying it to rent it, you're buying it to Airbnb it, or whatever the case is, as long as you're doing it for the long haul, you typically should be just fine. Another big problem with buying for the short term term is that a lot of times people that are buying for the short term are trying to time the market. They're trying to get into the market at the perfect time, and they're trying to get out of the market at the perfect time. But the problem with that is that you can never truly predict any market, let alone the real estate market, and we've seen that in 2020. A year where we thought that prices should have gone down, they went up, right? A year that we thought in the middle of a pandemic that everybody would panic sell, basically nobody decided to sell. Interest rates went down, obviously causing the demand to go up, and supply stayed low. So therefore, we can never truly look at a market and predict what is gonna happen. Take the stock market, for example. The stock market took a V-shaped recovery back in March and re-rallied to an all-time high. And there's basically no real good reason for that. You still have tons of people unemployed, tons of businesses closed down throughout the entire country, and pretty much just overall, there is really no reason for the stock market to rally the way that it did. And I just tell you that because I want you to understand that no market is 100% predictable. Therefore, if you're trying to time the market, then overall, you're already making a bad decision. Another really big way to go ahead and mitigate a lot of your risk is to just buy the property at a good enough price. So obviously, this isn't gonna necessarily pertain to you if you already own a home, but if you're looking to buy a home and the market is a little bit uncertain, you're not sure what it's gonna do over the next couple of years, then what I encourage you to do is just to make sure that you get a property below market value. And you can obviously do that whether you're buying the property to live in yourself or you're buying it as an investment property. The thing is, you should always be looking for a good deal. And I see so many first-time home buyers and so many different people that aren't investors that for whatever reason, they think it's perfectly okay to pay full retail. But the reality of the situation is you don't necessarily have to pay full retail for a house. What I would really encourage people to do in a market that's a little bit uncertain, even if they're planning on living in the property themselves, is to really look for a good deal in a good location and buy it below market value. Even if it needs a little bit of TLC, it needs to be fixed up a little bit. I mean, come on, at the end of the day, as long as you're buying it below market value, who really cares? And this is really gonna help you mitigate a lot of your risk because if you're buying a property below market value, then by default, you're gaining equity in the property day one. And if you're gaining equity in the property day one, then if the market goes ahead and takes a 10% drop or 20% drop, in theory, you might have gotten a 10 or a 20% discount. So really, you're mitigating that risk. So if the market does fall down a little bit, it isn't the end of the world because you got a good enough deal on the property to where you're not ever gonna be, in theory, upside down on the property. This should apply to you no matter when you're watching the video, right? No matter what the market is doing, whether the market is at an all-time high or an all-time low, you should really always try to find a good deal in a good area. And this is never going to hurt you, right? This is only gonna benefit you. There's really no downside to getting a good deal on the property. You know, there's a lot of investors out there that say you make money in the buy. And the reason that they say that is because if you don't buy it right, it's real hard to sell it right? I mean, if you don't buy it at a discount, regardless of what the market is doing, it's hard to sell it at a profit. And obviously your goal might not be getting into real estate to make a profit. Maybe your goal is obviously just to buy a home and to live in it, to raise a family, and ultimately to just do what it is that you're going to do regardless. But even if you're that type of person, buying it at a discount is definitely a good idea. Another really big piece of advice that I have for you is to focus on your monthly payment and not the value of the property. Because the value of the property, like I said earlier, is always gonna be fluctuating. It's always gonna be going up and down. But your monthly payment, again, assuming you're on a 30-year fixed mortgage, is always gonna stay the same. So as long as when you're going to buy a property, you're not overpaying, you're not buying something that you can't afford to impress people that don't care with money that you don't have, then you should be just fine. You wanna buy something that's within reason, that fits in your budget, that if you had a bad year or even a couple of bad years, that ultimately it wouldn't take you out of the game. You really wanna buy a property that you can pay no matter what. You know, I see so many people that they go out and they buy a big house that they can't afford, and I'm like, what are you doing? You always wanna buy something that you can afford. And again, you know, I see a lot of people that they'll focus on the property value and not focus on the monthly payment. Because it really doesn't matter what's going on in the world, as long as your monthly payment you can afford and you're willing to hold on to it for the long haul, then you can really never go wrong. So when going to buy a property, really focus on that monthly payment. Really talk to a good lender and focus on the monthly payment, right? And a lot of that is going to include, you know, how good of an interest rate you can get and things of that nature, whether or not there's an HOA in the neighborhood, what your property taxes are gonna be, and things that play into your overall monthly payment. But make sure that that payment is well below what you can afford so that you never put yourself in a bad situation to begin with. I think a couple of other obvious things are to make sure to really know when to buy and when not to buy. And I'm not talking about the market, I'm talking about you personally. Are you in a good place to buy? Does it make sense for you to buy? Or should you focus on just renting for a little while until you can really buy and feel 100% confident in buying? And another thing is, if you're a seller, you're a homeowner, and maybe the market is at an all-time high, like right now, where you have really low supply and really high demand, And, if you're looking at your monthly expenses and the market is really good, and you're looking at your mortgage and your car payment and your phone bill and all of the other stuff that goes along with living life, if it's too much to afford, then maybe it is something to consider to sell in a seller's market, right? To sell when the market is at an all-time high. Downsizing isn't the end of the world. And I think for a lot of people, really looking at your life and saying, do I need this big of a house? Is this really something I need, right? Maybe the kids have already moved out, right? And maybe you don't need the big of a house anymore. In those scenarios, really looking at the market and saying, well, maybe you don't want to get greedy, right? Maybe you bought in 2010, 11, or 12. You got a really good deal on your house. It's worth a significant amount more money right now, and you don't need that big of a house anymore. Then, as opposed to being greedy and holding on to it, go ahead and sell your house and take all of that cash and then go and downsize a little bit and get a house that you can actually afford. And now you have a bunch of extra cash laying around that you can, go ahead and invest, right? You can go ahead and maybe buy a rental property, or you can go ahead and wait for the market to make a little bit of a correction and ultimately buy a property then, or whatever the case is. Obviously, there's 1,000 things that you can do with a little bit of extra cash, such as potentially buying a property that is obviously a downsized property for you that needs a little bit of TLC, putting a little bit of work into the property, and then making even a little bit more equity on that property. And now you maybe only have 30 or 40% debt on the said property. I think overall, it's really just about being smart. Even when you're buying, I'll typically look at a property and I'll say, hey, even if I'm flipping a property, right? Even if I'm planning to Airbnb it, or even if I'm planning on living there myself, I'll look at a property and I'll say, is this a property that if everything just quote unquote, crap hit the fan, could I rent this out? Is it in a neighborhood where there's a lot of other rentals? What do the rental rates look like, right? Would the rental rates cover my mortgage? Would the rental rates cover my mortgage if rental rates dropped a little bit, right? And really studying the market. Am I getting a house in a neighborhood that is growing, that is expanding, where jobs are moving to and not getting taken from, right? And really understanding as much as you can possibly understand before you make any rational or irrational decisions. I think it's just a matter in 2021 of being a little bit smarter. We look at the markets, and once and for all, we know that nobody can predict anything, right? You see every news source out there and everybody talking a million miles an hour about everything under the sun, and at the end of the day, nobody really knows what they're talking about. But the smarter that you are about things, and the more due diligence that you do in the beginning, and the more that you really look at your finances and look at your money and decide to make better financial decisions, the better off that you'll be. Really look at it. Is there any costs you can cut? Can you save money? Do you have an emergency fund? If you're somebody that already can barely afford to pay your mortgage, you don't have an emergency fund, and you're not sure about the future, then that's something you want to take a good hard look at. Why is it that you don't have an emergency fund? Is it because you're living above your means, right? What can you do to change that? Can you sell one of your cars? Can you maybe go pay cash for a car where maybe the car is a little bit cheaper and a little bit older, but you don't have such a high car payment or high car insurance? There's so many things that you can do to be smart, to protect yourself if the real estate market were to crash, that I would just hate to see, another crash happen and a bunch of people lose a bunch of money, panic sell, and ultimately be left back at square one. So I would encourage you to figure out what your house is worth if you own. If you don't own, make sure to take some of the advice that I gave you in the video if you're about to buy. Make sure you get a good deal. Make sure you get a good interest rate. Make sure you're buying because it's the right time to buy. Make sure that you're not buying something that you can't afford. And ultimately, just make sure to make smart decisions. Guys, there you have it. My name is Austin Zaback. I really appreciate you for watching the video. If you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you would just smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm, as I'm typically talking about real estate, the stock market, how to make money, save money, and invest your money. There's a couple of links in the description down below that I would love if you would check out. One of them being the A&A Show, which is my brand new podcast where we interview cool people all around the world. Also, we're talking about life, business, and money. And a couple of other links down there as well, so definitely go check those out. And also drop in the comment section down below what you liked and didn't like about the video, and I would love to interact with you down there. We'll see you in the next one.